everybody. By the way, first of all, I have huge admiration for this group and for Julie and Rick for just kind of just moving this forward. And I want to kind of situate you guys in where you are, and you're going to see that I'm going to do that in this presentation. So my name is Sharon Byrne. I'm the executive director of the Montecito Association. I've also done a lot of work in getting homeless people housed in the city of Santa Barbara, and have seen kind of some of the struggles and the travails there with affordable housing. I also do a lot of work with the United Nations, and it's an interesting thing when these things finally come together, right? So I'm not doing peace building, things like that. I'm actually a delegate to UN Women, the Conference on the Status of Women this year, and I was also a delegate to the first intergenerational forums on equity and equality in both Mexico City and Paris this year. And so when we started working on Senate Bills 9 and 10, and Julie was kind enough to let me be in on some of these meetings, you know, I could see that we were just kind of on this train that was really going to be a problem for us. And I thought, you know what, this can't just be a California problem. You know, it's got to be happening in other places. And I have family that lives around the world, so I was checking with them, and sure enough, it is. So I'm gonna walk you through some of that. I did this presentation that you're about to see for California's Little Hoover Commission a couple of weeks ago, actually. And it almost feels out of date now to me, but given that everything is happening so fast, but hopefully you'll all be able to see my screen. And let me see if I can get the slideshow to start. Okay, there we go. So, and I did this show for the Little Hoover Commission because they were actually taking an interest in housing, and they wanted to be able to have multiple speakers come look at it. And they did it in 3 sessions. And the first session, everything I saw was YIMBY, YIMBY, YIMBY. And I called the chair and said, look, that was extremely one-sided. You're not looking at some of the other problems that are going on here. So he said, great, you get up here and present. So I did, and I was surprised that they let me do that. All right, so here we go. So first of all, the housing is a human right. This is why the UN takes quite an interest in it. They passed the Declaration of Human Rights back in 1948, and many countries have worked this into their constitutions. We are not one of them, but you know, housing is considered a human right in Article 25. It is now a global problem, homelessness. We all tend to think that, you know, California is the only one having these problems. Not so. Australia now has a sizable homeless problem, as does the United Kingdom, which I was a little shocked to learn. Canada has 129,000 homeless, and they had a presidential election and parliamentary election just this past Tuesday. And the pledge from their president, Trudeau, was, I will ban foreign investment in Canadian homes, hopefully to let some Canadians compete for them. And we will end the practice of blind bidding, where you don't know what the other party's doing. World cities are seeing this problem, with Amsterdam, Seoul, and Barcelona now racking up homeless populations that they never used to have. The United States obviously tops the list. No, I think actually China has the most homeless people in the world, although it's not a well-publicized statistic, but the US is certainly big at the top of the list here. And what causes it is displacement. And the UN has multiple terms for displacement. It's, you know, displacement internally, economic refugee, or displacement externally because of conflict, right? You become a refugee. So the UN looks at housing as stability, security, and dignity, but not as a commodity that you financialize. And so they appointed a special rapporteur to housing quite a few years ago. And in 2019, they wrote a very strongly worded letter to Blackstone and said, hey, your practices are egregious and you are forcing people out. You're displacing people and you're doing it globally, and we've got a problem with it. In the United States, obviously, you know, we're starting to see this problem too, where we've seen Blackstone. I've been seeing some reports that are coming through, real estate reports. I see Deutsche Bank listed as a major buyer of US homes, which I find interesting. Why is a German bank taking a lot of interest in US homes? And the Wall Street Journal had started writing on this about 2 years ago, and they've been sort of increasing the alarm. And the Wall Street Journal could hardly be called the defenders of the renter class, right? That's kind of not their bailiwick, but they think there's a problem with financializing of homes. The New York Times Magazine thinks there's a problem with it. And it looks like, yes, Blackstone is a huge one here. So is Deutsche Wohnen, which is the big arm of Deutsche Bank that does investments in Germany. So let's look at, the displacement of residents and what happens, and how to, where can we look at housing? So one of the things that frustrated many of us in this whole conversation about SB 9 and 10 was we didn't look at some of the things like, what about the existing supply and what's happening to that? So there's 90,000 vacant homes in Los Angeles and 50,000 people experiencing homelessness. It's not going to take mayors in cities long to do this math. Right, they're going to start looking at this math, and actually, there's a group that is the Anti-Eviction Project, and they are doing this mapping really all over the place. And this is what they looked at in California. And you can see who is buying up the housing in California and where they're doing it, right? So obviously Sacramento's heavy, San Francisco Bay Area would be heavy, Los Angeles and San Diego. And then look who are the top buyers, right? So you can see it right here. It's Blackstone, Colony Starwood, Starwood Waypoint. So this is who's doing the buying institutionally of investment homes. And sometimes they just let them sit vacant, looking for price appreciation, and they'll cash in later. All right, we're not the only ones having this problem. Let's go look other places. So Barcelona definitely has the problem, and they have got huge problems. They figured that they had become sort of a vacation rental capital in the world. And it really erupted about 7 years ago, where it just became very evident that neighborhoods were being destroyed, that it was all about, owners of these short-term rental apartments. But at the same time, lots of Barcelonans couldn't find a place to live. So their city council and mayor enacted something where they started fining people who were leaving flats vacant instead of renting them out to Barcelonans. And again, look who's operating here in Spain, Blackstone, big acquirer of real estate in Spain. And so then the mayor, who's just an absolute pistol, Mayor Ada Colau, she actually then went the next step, which is, okay, you better start renting these out, you corporations, or I'm going to repossess them and give them to a housing authority and rent them out to Barcelonans. Berlin, there was a huge election in Berlin today on this very topic. 80% of 4 million Berliners rent. And the city tried a rent freeze to stop all the residents from being forced out in the pandemic. They too are having this institutional investor problem. Their federal court overturned it, which I think would easily happen in the United States. So here's a question: is who's owning Berlin? What's causing this problem? And what they found is that people will come in, and investors will come in, they'll buy the apartment. This is a very familiar story to those of you cities, right? Add a lift or a balcony or paint job or some landscaping, and then try to get tenants out and then jack the rent. So Berlin 3 years ago, they started gathering signatures for a referendum. So Mayor Bill Brand, you may be at this for a minute. And this referendum was basically to put it on their ballot to expropriate homes. If a corporation owned more than 3,000 homes in Berlin, this referendum that was held today would allow the Berlin Senate to appropriate those homes, put them in the control of a newly created housing authority. They don't have it yet. And then turn around and rent it to low and moderate income Berliners. Here's the outcome of the vote. 56.9% have gone yes. It passed today. So this is huge. This is just groundbreaking. This has not been done before, but this is an example of what some cities in some places are looking at in terms of, how do I return the housing supply that I've got back to my own citizens? London also has a really serious housing crisis. And how did this become so unaffordable? So they've got 3 different problems. One is that people are just buying up flats and buying up buildings, and they call it buy to leave. And that means that it's never occupied. It just sits there. And they're meant to, get resale value over time, and you'll just, reap your profits then. Tons of second homes, which would make sense in a world capital like London, that there would be a lot of second homes. Airbnb, though, they are seeing that Airbnb is just chewing them up from the inside, and average Londoners are getting pushed out. They just have no place to be in London. So, London is reported to have the largest short-term rental market of any European city, but it's really hard for their governments to track it, rather like it is for many American cities. Going over into the Asiatic quarter, Seoul, Korea. This is going to sound very familiar to a lot of Californians. Here's your average property price, now 14 times the average household income in Korea. And it's pricing families out. So it's causing huge political upheaval for their national government. Their president really feels kind of besieged by it. So one of the things they're looking at is to try to convert some of their hotels. We had a bill this year, Senate Bill 621, that was going to try the same thing. convert some hotel spaces into studios to, ease that housing crunch, because there's so much anger over not being able to afford housing. And the apartments there have risen more than 50% in 4 years. So these are serious pricing spikes. Okay, New Zealand. Again, this is going to look very familiar to those of us in California, right? New Zealand suddenly having a homeless problem. And they have gotten into a human rights crisis over it, right? Because they have so many that are showing up. Their prime minister, who I think is just a rock star, Jacinda Ardern, she tried earlier to do some cooling measures, right? Just to kind of slow down the runaway, pricing. And what is happening there is that of all the OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development nations, New Zealand's got the highest rise in prices over the last year. So, they're really struggling with this. Okay, so now we know that this is a global problem. It is not a unique to California problem. And I'm pushing, obviously, a narrative here, which is that, investors are a big part of driving this problem. And this started actually back in 2008. So it didn't just happen last year. After the, sort of worldwide economic meltdown from the '08 recession, Blackstone and other players started getting on the field, and they started buying it, US housing in particular, but obviously they've gone global. And they've invested billions in housing worldwide. In the pandemic in the last year, you probably are aware, stock markets globally overheated. So many people had flush, pandemic cash, plowed it into stock markets. They got very overheated. Stocks got very overpriced. So investors started plowing into housing because those were really solid guaranteed returns. And now our housing markets have gone speculative, and that is not good. And again, this is happening worldwide. It's not unique to California. And there have been news stories just this week that Zillow is an actor in this space, right? The company who's supposed to be selling, helping you connect to homes, functioning as an online realtor, if you will. They're now in the business of buying the homes themselves and just flipping them. And they're insidious about it. They'll buy like 20 homes for $300,000, and the 21st home they'll buy it for $350,000 over what the price should be. And they're doing that so that it ups the comps and then raises the prices of the rest of the stock that they have. So it's super insidious and speculative. And so this is financialization and privatization of housing markets globally. And it is a huge problem. And the reason I, started looking at this so much is that very often in California, we get lost in this conversation of NIMBY versus UMB, local versus state. California, it's just expensive, it's overcrowded. When you see what is happening worldwide, you realize you are in the thick of this. You are on a world stage here. And if we weren't having this problem as the world's 5th largest economy, something would be wrong with us. But we're not looking at the roles that there's other players moving around doing things to our housing market. And none of the legislation that came out of Sacramento this year did a thing to address that. So when we profitize housing, we obviously get displacement, right? And so you can't compete. I mean, you all know people who tried to buy a house and got outbid instantly for cash. And who has cash like that, right? When institutional investors take over apartment buildings, they will typically deploy no-fault evictions, displace tenants, and raise the rent higher for new tenants. So lower income families, this is a story we all know too, right? They're all getting pushed out further and further afield to get their housing. Some people are moving into cars. So we're making more homeless with this. We need to stop doing that. And city officials in particular have a vested interest in not making more homeless, because it ends up being their problem to deal with, right? So as a city official, all of you guys I know are very concerned about, that's what I don't want to do is create more homelessness. But when we have a lot of homelessness and a lot of displacement, it's a huge sign that something's really gone wrong in the housing markets. So how do we thwart that? And you've seen some examples, right? So I've talked to you about the Canadian election, and President Trudeau is going to be, Prime Minister Trudeau is actually going to be reinstated, which is great. Holland, about 2 weeks ago, published, there were some news articles that came out where they are going to make it so that there can be no sales of new or recently sold low to mid home prices to investors. Mid-price homes to investors for 4 years. And the reason they're doing that is they're trying to stop the run-up speculation in their low and moderate income places. Many people in Amsterdam are getting very much pushed out and have been openly complaining that between vacation rental by owner and foreign investors, who's going to be in Amsterdam, right? Who's going to be left there except some tourists and some investors that never go because everyone else is being pushed out. Berlin obviously just had the referendum, right? So there, that referendum has passed, and again, this is first in the world. So this is kind of a big deal. London is looking to ban no fault evictions. That's the move that they're going to try to make. China also is in the news. There's a huge meltdown going on of Evergrande, one of China's largest real estate development investment firms. They've missed massive bond payments this week to all of their creditors. So big shakeup kind of going there. It caused the stock markets to wobble this week. Here's what China's trying to do. And President Xi Jinping, whether we like him or don't like him, said multiple times in the last 2 weeks, housing is for living in, not for speculation. Those were his words. And so what they've done is they have increased their mortgage rates. They've accelerated their development of their government subsidized rental housing. They are now applying a very large lens of scrutiny on the financing of developers and any newly listed home prices. They want anything that was newly listed. They do not want it going into the hands of developers. So we kind of got stuck a little bit here, right? Where we, kind of got sideswiped with, build it, build it, build it. But, we're not having a luxury housing crisis. And that does seem to be what gets built. So what we kind of got, caught up in this rhetoric of, there's racism that's involved in single family zoning. Okay. But if we are going to upzone like crazy to try to deal with our housing crisis, where's the water going to come from? Where are the environmental resources here? There was polling conducted by our friends over at Healthcare is a Human Right, where Senate Bill 9 and 10 were just wildly unpopular with voters, and yet they were signed anyway. And basically, our feeling is, wow, we're just we're feeding billionaires with this idea that it's going to trickle down, but we already know, no, they're going to go build spaceships. They're not going to toss housing at us. So our governor is doing some good things. I mean, we have to appreciate home key and room key in terms of homeless, ending homelessness and really working with, kind of a dead asset in the pandemic, which was hotel rooms and turning them into temporary housing. The 12 billion investment in housing and homelessness is great. California had an eviction moratorium that expires at the end of this month that was beyond what the feds offered. We did pandemic stimulus funds, we did rental assistance as a state. But the bills that came through were supply side trickle down. And I just feel like we could do better, especially since we are the world's 5th largest economy and we have performed well in the pandemic. Couldn't we have had like just a press the pause button and say, wow, this is a global problem. We're clearly being effective. Let's get some stakeholders together. LA City Councilman Paul Koretz really suggested this too. We need to get the stakeholders together and really thoughtfully consider possible solutions that would work best for our people. And we didn't do that. So I'm going to offer you some buckets of solutions. And there's 3 distinct buckets that I think would help if we would look at these in California. It would help our cities with problems of displacement and homelessness, that would help stop speculative investment. And there are places we can look at for housing. So first thing we need to do, I feel, is we need to just protect our people and stop displacing them. So many countries have written that housing is human right into their constitutions. We didn't. California could have. It hasn't. Families and residents should be given first priority, I feel, and I don't know how you would do this, but in bidding for a home, they should not be having to compete directly with institutional investors. I'm sort of interested in the moves that China is making on that regard, and Holland. We need to strengthen mitigation provisions and no fault evictions. And honestly, we need to get to a point where we say to developers, hi, you're planning to build something in our city. Are you going to be displacing current residents? Oh, really? We don't do that here. So you need to figure out what you're going to do with those folks. And you're going to need to move them somewhere else and pay for that because we don't displace and make more people homeless here. So I feel like that is something that cities can do. You've seen some cities that are attempting it right now. And I think it's something that we need to be looking at doing in California. The second bucket of solutions is, how do you kind of stop the Zillows, the Deutsche Banks, and there are other ones, right? I've forgotten the name of them, but there's that insidious group that's operating mostly in Northern California, right? Picasso or something like that. And they buy homes and they sell them as timeshares, as second homes to other people. And, neighborhoods in Northern California just hate this, right? They just hate it because it's taking housing away from being permanent housing, and instead it's putting it in the hands of other people. So I would love to see us make a move like what Canada is talking about, which is no foreign investment in domestic homes. Like, why do Californians have to compete with foreign investors to be able to live in their own state? Second homes and vacancy taxes and fines. I like these two. And Barcelona and Vancouver both have pretty bulletproof ordinances, and they're using the money to to fund affordable and homeless housing, right? So you buy a second home, you leave it vacant, you pay a fine. And I like that. I think we ought to outlaw VRBO and Airbnb. That's a market we should have just never, that's a sharing economy that really should have never gotten off the ground. It would be an immediate return of supply. On the little street I'm living in Santa Barbara, there's probably 12 houses on this block. They were lower income, working class family houses. 6 have gone to VRBO. What happened to those families? I don't know, but I know they can't afford to live here anymore, which is crazy. And then Aspen did something pretty innovative too. If you build a luxury home in Aspen, they require you to make a contribution to a workforce housing fund. And the reason for that is they know that your luxury housing is going to create demand for more workers, and those folks have to live somewhere. So they look to fund housing with these fees. And then the final bucket of solutions is, what can we do? Where can we get some housing that we can't get it today, right? So how can we get some affordable housing? Because none of the bills that came through this year did anything for affordable housing. So how do we get to that? So here in Santa Barbara, I'm embarrassed to admit, our mass transit district has a giant vacant lot off the freeway that is very close to behavioral wellness services and general relief funds and all kinds of social services. And they're going to build market rate and luxury housing on that. And I am giving them a lot of bad press for that, because obviously MTD, mass transit district constituents are not the people that are going to be going into luxury and market rate housing. And it feels to me like you should be doing something to help your constituents. So if you're a school district, city, county, transit district, and you own some public lands where we could build some housing, you have to use it for affordable housing. You should not be allowed to do market rate and luxury homes there. There were some good post-pandemic tools in the toolkit this year. I don't think any of them are going to make it through, but Senate Bill 15 would have let you do some affordable housing and rewarded a city for doing it with grant funds and using dead retail and big box stores. There are 3 here in Santa Barbara. It would have been great to have turned those into luxury units. Senate Bill 6 trying for the same thing with dead office space, right? There's a lot of office vacancies as a result of the pandemic. And then 621, which is dead on arrival, unfortunately, was a brave attempt to take kind of old motor court hotels and convert them to homeless housing. And then I think tiny homes is a thing. It is really a thing. And it's not just a thing for people who want to downsize. It's being looked at as viable homeless housing as well. We don't really have zoning for it, don't really know how to do it. But it would be great if there were fast paths to do that, especially if you had some vacant parking lot that some public agency owned. This would be a fast path to getting homeless and affordable housing. So I'd like for us to work together on solutions that get to yes, rather than kind of what we just went through. And knowing that this is kind of the landscape that we're standing on, that this is a global problem. And of course, California is experiencing it in an extremely protracted and painful place. So thank you very much for allowing me to share this with you.